Hello and welcome to another Zeus tips video by me, Cody Hawkcaster. In this video we're going to be covering basically how to modify vehicles as a Zeus in vanilla Arma 3. Specifically we will be looking at the Loadouts function, the Pylons function, the inventory function, and the garage function. So first let's begin with Loadouts. So oftentimes when we put vehicles in Arma 3, we sometimes realize that certain vehicles have certain pieces of equipment that we might not necessarily want them to use. For example, this Kamish has access to a 30mm autocannon, a 7.62 machine gun, and 2 sets of AT missiles. Now, if we have an operation where we're using armored forces, we might not want them to necessarily get hit by AT missiles, as in Arma 3, vehicles can be quite squishy. So what we can do is we can actually remove those, and not simply by just firing them off. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the vehicle, we're going to double click on its icon, we're going to go down to the loadout section, and from here we're going to choose the weapon we want to modify. So we have access to the 30mm autocannon, 7.62 machine gun, or the Titan missile system, all of which you can note are controlled by the gunner. So on, for example, 30mm section, we can change the types of rounds that are actually fired, going from APFSCS rounds to multi-purpose, and choose them for multiple vehicles. As you'll notice, some of these have different round types and are actually different despite the fact that they share names. For example, here we can see that there's different tracers. That pattern's also shown with the AP rounds. 7.62, we have tons of belts in the game that we can use, everything from our 200 round belt that we standard have to a 2,000 round belt, whatever suits your fancy. Finally, we have Titan AT missiles. So if we want to have a armor-friendly op, we can simply remove the Titan AT missiles. This way, the gunner will not be able to use them. If we want to be mean, we can also add a bunch. Also notice that, again, there are several different types of missiles, and we'll be going into those specific ones and what we can do with those later on in this video. So just to prove to you that I've removed all the missiles, I'm going to hit OK, hit OK again, and I'm going to control the gunner. So if we look in our top right, we can see that we still have our autocannon, AP, and high explosive, still have our coax, but no Titan AT missiles of any sort. So loadouts can be actually really fun for vehicles because it gives you a lot of customization. So let's go through a few examples. So first, if you ever have a AA site that you build, you may notice that it can be kind of annoying to run out of missiles rather quickly. I'm not going to sit through the whole process, but as you know from any given ARIA system, it only has 4 missiles to launch, which depending on your op, might not be as many as you like. So to simply change that, we go into double click it again, go to loadout, and simply we go to the round type that we want, and we just add on to it. Note that this is in sets of 4. So we have 8 sets of 4, meaning we have 32 rounds in total in this specific case. So if we remote control again, you can see in the top right that it's starting to load another magazine, and we have 4 rounds in that magazine, of which we have 7 then left in reserve. So we can also look at things such as the Prowler. The Prowler is really cool because it usually has an AT launcher, but what we can do is if we edit the loadout, we can also give it an AA missile. Now, given the Zephyr AA missile is a medium-range missile, so it's not necessarily the best missile, but it's better than having absolutely nothing in a NATO vehicle with as much armor as a piece of tinfoil. So just to show you that that's actually working, we're going to jump in the gunner seat. You'll see that right now we have 2 AA missiles. You'll also notice it doesn't follow my tracker, and it simply flies off into the distance. We can also then switch to the AT missile, which is automatically loading. We're going to wait for that to finish. And we switch back to an AT missile. Simple as that. Gives you a bit more variety of choices you can put into your Prowler. Following this, we have every main battle tank in the game. In this case, we're going to be showing the T-140 Angara, but keep in mind this applies to everything that uses a major cannon, be that the Merkava, to the T-140, to the T-100, to the tank destroyers. All of them that use a large caliber gun can do the following feature. We can add into it the ability to use ATGMs. Now, these ATGMs will depend on the specific vehicle you're in and the faction you're going by. For CSAT, you basically fire a wire-guided missile that you can see kind of travels like a Verona. It's basically just a Verona rocket, is all it really is. Again, this follows your trace where you're looking. It'll go around. This will give players the opportunity to actually dodge missiles or shots rather than necessarily just get hit by them. Also be aware, as a missile is getting fired at the players, it will usually give them a lock message, further indicating that they are being targeted. For NATO vehicles, such as the Merkava type vehicles, they will actually use Titan missiles. So that does give you the opportunity to actually have top attack and lock on. Though be advised, it's hard to actually lock on with because there's no sensors that actually interface with the missile to allow it to lock. Following this, we have something like the Gorgon. As we showed earlier, when we double click, go to loadouts, it has a 30mm autocannon just like the Kamish, as they use basically the same turret. But we then also have the missile types. Again, we have several different types of sets of rounds of AT missiles, and then we have these 2 sets of AA missiles, really 3, but these last 2 are basically the exact same. We have the Zephyr, which is a medium-range AA missile, which comes in sets of 4, and we have the Titan long missile, which is basically the same thing you have on Antigoras, which is, again, a shorter range missile that's more maneuverable and locks on the infrared. Both of these are usable, but generally speaking, you want to leave your AA stuff to your Tigruses and the Cheetahs. But this does give you the option to apply it to a Gorgon or other forms of Kamish. Finally, we come to self-like turrets. So, for a mortar, we, generally speaking, have 3 types of rounds that we can use by default. We have the HE round, the big boom, the smoke round, the big vape, and finally the flare round, the big illumination. But there is some hidden features of the mortar that you don't get to see by default. If we edit its loadout, we can see it has 2 extra types of rounds that we don't previously get to usually see. We have guided shells, which, just so you know, will lock on to, basically when they're fired, anything that's within, I believe it's 100 meters of where they land, that is a vehicle that is turned on and is hot, it will fire a AT round at that and will hit that, doing quite a bit of damage. It won't take it out of a main battle tank, but it will destroy any MRAP and basically any most APCs in 1 to 2 hits. Along with that, we also have laser guided shells, which follows basically the same principle of if it detects a laser within about 100 meters of where it's landing, it will guide itself to it. Be advised, laser guided shells, while they are pretty good, are just a little bit more accurate than normal shells in terms of its maneuverability. So don't rely on them too heavily over just proper gun precision. That wraps up the loadouts part of this section. Now we're going to move on to covering pylons. Now, pylons are basically the outer part of weapon racks for aircraft specifically. If you have played on the Alta server of NAC, you might remember the glory days of having a Black Wasp dynamic loadout. Now, normally when you go into Zeus, the players cannot dynamic loadout. That's nothing you can change. However, as a Zeus, you can edit the dynamic loadout. The way you do that is you double-click the vehicle, and you're going to go down to the pylon section. Click on pylons, and then you can find whatever weapon systems you want. You can't give it whatever weapon system you want necessarily, though. There are specific weapon systems that are exclusive to that vehicle and that can only function on that vehicle. That's built into Arma 3. There are ways to get around that through coding, but most servers don't allow you to do that, so you're basically going to be stuck with whatever Arma 3 chooses you to have. If you want to be someone who's really into symmetry, you can also hit this mirror function down in the bottom right, which will mirror weapons to both sides. Along with this, Arma 3 comes with some default loadouts. You can have your custom loadout that you're obviously building. You can set it to be empty, which empties all the slots. A default loadout, which does whatever the game spawns it with. AA, CAS, and Cluster. For the Black Wasp, each variant of each vehicle will have their own specific ones to go through. But generally speaking, you can expect to have a CAS variant of everything, plus a default, plus an empty, plus obviously a custom. Now, pylons are really cool, but they do come with some major caveats. First thing to keep in mind is that just because a vehicle can mount a specific type of weapon system doesn't mean they can effectively use it. For example, we have the Pawnee. If we look into the pylons, I've added on an ASRAM and a Scalpel, which are both really great weapon systems to use. The only problem is that the ASRAM requires a radar to lock onto vehicles, which a Pawnee does not have, and a Scalpel requires the ability to interface with some form of heat signature or camera to fire it, both of which the Pawnee does not have at its disposal, making both these weapon systems virtually useless. Now, there are ways to get around this, I'm sure, but as it stands to my knowledge, there is no way to make both of these weapon systems nearly as effective as they would be on other vehicles. So keep that in mind when you're selecting Pylons for vehicles. A major thing to also keep in mind with Pylons is that if you want to edit the Pylons, so hit, again, double click, go to Pylons, and you are selecting any of these, if a player has entered a vehicle before you hit OK and exit this set of menus, that vehicle will no longer be able to have its pylons edited and will not use the pylons you have selected. Keep your players outside of your vehicle for as long as it takes for you to update all the pylons. As soon as you edit all the pylons and have everything set, hit OK and hit OK again, and then they may enter the vehicle. Again, I cannot stress this enough. If they enter it early, that vehicle will be you'll be no longer able to edit the pylons of that vehicle at all. You will have to delete the vehicle and spawn a new one. So, if we have something like a Cashman, which has a gunner system to it, what we can actually do, which is pretty cool, is we can go into Pylons and we can actually set the Pylons to be specific to the driver or the gunner. By default, Arma 3 sets it so that everything's set to the gunner. But something like a Skyfire doesn't really make sense for the gunner control versus the pilot who's actually going to be maneuvering the aircraft. So what you do is you click on the little symbol for gunner and it'll toggle it to driver. If we toggle gunner, it goes to driver. If we toggle driver, it goes to gunner. So on and so forth. Just to prove to you that that is in fact working, I'm going to remote control. And right now I'm in the pilot seat. Fire missiles, and I'm hitting F to change my weapons, and I can't change it. If I then switch into the turret control, I have the cannon. And I also have access to the scalpels. But notice I do not have access to the Skyfires because I have assigned those to be specific to the driver rather than to the gunner. So that basically covers our Pylon section. Again, I cannot emphasize this enough. If you have a player enter a vehicle before you've edited the Pylons fully and hit OK to fully get out of the menu, it will not update the Pylons. And that vehicle will be no longer editable in terms of changing its pylons. So again, keep your players outside of your vehicle so that doesn't happen. So if pylons covered and finished, we can then get on to the garage function. Now, normally we have something like this, a Marshal. Pretty boring looking, doesn't have a lot of functionality to it necessarily outside of its base features. But what we can do is we can actually change it through the garage. So again, you double click onto the vehicle and we're gonna go down to the garage function. This will pop open a kind of new user interface where you're going to orbit around the vehicle. We can change everything from components to camouflage. If we go to components, we're going to get several toggles that we can kind of choose from. So for example, we can show the bags on the back. We can put a camo net on there. We can put a camo net on the turret. You can put some slat armor on. We can put some slat armor there. We can toggle stuff all around however we want, like to customize it to our heart's content. This is really nice if you're having a mission where it might be important to have slat armor. For example, say an urban environment. That doesn't come on a Marshal by default. It's really nice to have that as an option to add on to it. Along with this, we can normally edit the camouflage. The Marshal and most vehicles that come in a Pacific and non-Pacific variant will not actually have the ability to change the camouflage because there's a specific vehicle of a different type that has that camo already assigned. But things such as pickup trucks and other civilian vehicles have tons of different camouflages you can throw on them to change them up however you like. Again, to access that, you double click on the vehicle, go to the garage, and then choose components, whichever you like, and then hit close. So with that all finished, we then have our loadouts. So, do you ever have a problem where you send players out on a mission and halfway through they realize they didn't take what they needed? Now, partly that's their fault, but also it's a little bit of yours for not making sure they're prepared. Well, to get around that, we can use the loadouts. So if we double click on our vehicles, we go to inventory, sorry, not loadout, inventory, and we can actually assign pieces of equipment to the vehicle. So as it stands, this top left section is everything that's already loaded inside the vehicle. We can then look by guns, so if we need to give them a specific gun, we can give them that. If we need to make sure they have AT of a specific type, we can give them that, along with maybe some AA. We can give them scopes, sidearms, all the different types of accessories you can imagine in the world. Be that maps, binos, so on and so forth. All of these correspond to something in the arsenal. If you spend more than enough time in the arsenal, you'll know what all of these symbols generally represent. Along with that, we can give them stuff like explosives. Say we need to make sure that they have enough explosive charges to blow open all the buildings that we need. We can make sure they have that by giving them the explosive charges in the hunter itself, so we don't have to worry about them not having it. Along with this, we have the general edit section. Every time I use a vehicle, I will generally put a medkit, mine detector, and toolkit into every vehicle. I do that specifically because I know that despite the fact that we always try to prepare, not everyone remembers everything they need. So I like to cover all my bases by having a medkit, mine detector, and toolkit already in each vehicle, so that players don't have to wonder who has a toolkit, who has a medkit. Oh, it's just in the vehicles, we'll swap them out. So just for a quick summary before we end the video, we have loadouts, which let us select and modify the specific types of ammunition that each vehicle has, be that the rounds itself, to the tracers, to the missiles. All that are pertinent to whatever vehicle you're in. Again, double click on it, go to loadout, and then select the weapon system you want, select the ammunition you want, and add or subtract ammo from that count. After that, we went over the pylons section. Pylons allows you to edit the loadout, basically, of a airborne vehicle to assign bombs, missiles, all that sort. Keep in mind, there are specific pylons for each vehicle, and each vehicle can only select from a certain set of weapon systems by default in Arma 3. Also, major note, if your players are going to be using pylons on those vehicles, make sure they stay outside the vehicle until you have finished loading its pylons fully with what you want. Also keep in mind, not every vehicle's pylons are going to be necessarily useful to that vehicle. They can't all use them to their full extent of which the weapon system may be capable. Also keep in mind that you can assign pylons to the driver versus the gunner. This way, the gunner gets to have fun, and the driver also gets to have fun in different ways for their different weapon systems. Next, we went over the garage function, which lets us edit specific parts of a vehicle to add components onto it of all different sorts, along with edit the camouflage of the vehicle to make it look slightly different. Finally, last but not least, we went over how to edit the inventory of a vehicle. That way we can make sure players have the specific items they need in order to succeed in our missions in the future. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. My name is Cody Hawkcaster, and I'm happy to teach you more about Zeus, and hopefully I'll get back to you with some more episodes in the future. Thanks for watching.